Welcome everybody to another episode of Make America Civil Again. It's your boy Manny Mathis. Today we're going to be talking about education. I am here with my brother, Miykael.
Hey.
So Mike, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm grateful to be this man's older brother. Might that be said, older brother. You can't argue better looking, but that's not why we're here on film.
That's getting edited.
Yes. I actually work in finance. I have two degrees, one undergrad and a graduate degree, one an MBA focusing on finance and a undergraduate focusing on biblical studies.
First question is why are you so passionate about education?
I believe that education can open up a door that would not have previously existed if it not were for education. It provides experiences, again, opportunities, and an ability for one's worldview to open up. So if I believe this, I believe that education allows that to open up and therefore understand my world better, maybe understand society better, and understand people better.
Could you give me an example of why you think education is so important?
Sure. In formal sense, education allows me to better understand society, open up my worldview, and even maybe the person sitting next to me.
You think the goal in an education system is to get people to be persuaded to their argument or to make them think about an argument?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's both yes and no. I think part of that happens within the context of our education system where they are teaching them how to think and preparing them, but on the other hand, I think there is a little bit of political, if you will, a political swaying of I need you to believe this about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And that's not the point of education.
No.
I mean, if we look at just like the history of education in America, probably around the 1630s or so, as the Pilgrims or the Puritans settled in the Northeast, what happened was, as they began to establish their colonies, they also believed that it was really important for education to be available. And when I say available, that's limited because it was really the wealthy. Not only the wealthy, it was for males as well. And so the Puritans believed that it was really important for them to attend schools. Why? Martin Luther's influence in Europe, and what we have is the Protestant Reformation, is he encouraged his followers, or people that came under the movement, to be able to read the Bible. So after the printing press was kind of popularized in the 1400s, the 1500s, and the 1600s, they were pushing on young men especially to be able to read, become state leaders, become church leaders, and be able to read even to their families. And so the purpose of education then was to teach people how to read, how to think logically, how to behave as moral citizens. And obviously that kind of evolved because education was different in the South than it was in the Northeast. But still, that's kind of how it got started in the United States of America. But Horace Mann was an educator, and he saw the inequalities because poorer people and even African Americans in the United States at that time, they didn't have access to formal education. And so he began to work with people in his area to say, hey, we can bring and we should bring formal education to poorer people and African Americans and Native Americans because they don't have access, because he believed that education was the gateway to provide opportunities for people that may or may not have had those opportunities prior to being able to get educated.
Okay. Wow, I'm getting educated right now. What do you think went wrong with the United States educational system?
I think in a sense, formal education has not necessarily evolved with culture or society. So a quick example would be formal education was kind of birthed out of the Industrial Revolution, that industrial age, right? So as we're transitioning from goods or products being created in the home, now we're moving that into big factories and machines and energy and a different type of labor force. But you think about the reality of your labor force, right? You come in, you do your job, there's not much thinking to it, there's no autonomy, you clock in, you leave. Day after day after day after day, that's what you do. And so we're kind of creating this education system within the context of that time frame, and it becomes the same thing. And not to say that it didn't serve its purpose then, because I believe it did, but at the same time, things are radically different now. There's an array of different types of personalities and skill sets within the classroom, and I'm just not convinced that lecturing at them for hours at a time is conducive for the population as a whole.
What can we do as a culture to change the way we're educating kids?
Right. I mean, you spoke to this earlier, saying you would say that most people aren't happy with the education system or how we're educating students. And I think it's probably yes and no, because at least in our area, we're seeing a rise of private schools, we're seeing a rise of charter schools, we're seeing a rise of schools that will specialize. So you almost have to test into this schools that are specializing in a specific area, and I believe that's the wave of the future. So I think this specialization of these schools with these philosophies are important. Again, going back to the 1630s, the philosophy was, let's teach young men, I mean, you should have been included, but let's teach young men how to be logical, rational thinkers, how to behave in society, and not only that, let's prepare them for work in church and state. So there's preparatory to the next role or job they were going to do, but also to model them to be citizens that were role models within that society, and at the same time, let's think them to be rational thinkers, logical thinkers. I think this almost needs to be disclaimer, is even within the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, formal education was kind of becoming a thing. At the same time, parents were still responsible for educating their young ones. It wasn't actually always on the schools and always on formal education to train young people. Like, for a good portion of time, actually, the household was responsible for training the young person, right? And so it's different now, and states have officially taken over that since, I believe, 1918.
What problems do you see with education as of today?
A few things. There's not much creativity, right? There's hardly any creativity or autonomy. Young people are taught to think in one way. So to be honest with you, almost like a factory, we're creating these young people that think the same, act the same, talk the same, right? And I think that's a big problem for society, because people are different, and we have to explore their differences in both learning style, skills, passions, and desires, and it sounds weird, and exploit that, because everyone will contribute to society in a different way. Talking to someone for 4 or 5 hours just isn't that. This is not that productive. Let's be honest. Like, even in college, we're sitting in lectures, but how much information do you and I retain when someone is talking at us? Not much. We actually retain more information as we talk about the subject with our peers, or maybe even with the teacher, as we engage in actually doing whatever is being taught. It's just not sitting down and just listening. Third is just one size fits all. You might have one student in the class that's a little bit faster in his thinking than everyone else. You have another student next to him that doesn't understand it as fast. Well, he's labeled as, or she's labeled as, whatever, they're labeled as not as smart, but the reality is that's not true. Maybe they're not wired to think as fast or as quick, right? So what happens is you have everybody else that they kind of have this pace of learning, and so the teacher will have to concentrate on the middle. So the one that's really smart, or his pace of learning is faster, he's bored because he's way past the other students, and the one who's in the back he's not quite understanding, he's left behind too. So the ones that really help, the one in the front, push him further, and the one in the back, so he can maybe get to the middle or whatnot. And so this one size fits all model is not productive. What young people aren't allowed, and they don't even know this, is to think for themselves. And so let me give you a quick example. When I'm not the perfect parent, and I make a lot of mistakes, but I think I had a really cool parenting moment with my son probably 2 or 3 days ago. So yeah, maybe 2 or 3 days ago, my son was attempting to grab a book, and his books in his room are kind of in cubbies. So we have a top row, a middle row, and a bottom row, and his book is in one of the cubbies, but this book was stuck because it was in the middle row. And I can tell he's old enough now that he was really frustrated. He was unable to pull the book out of the cubby. And 2 things: I can just grab the book for him, or I can show him how to do it. But I thought it was actually important to show him there were 3 or 4 different ways to pull the book out. And so I did every single one. So I said, hey, little guy, here's one option, and grab the book. Then I put it back. I said, here's another option. And I changed the way I was able to solve the problem in like 3 different ways. And then I created the problem for him because I wanted him to solve it by himself. And finally, he actually pulled the book out in none of the ways that I just showed him, but I was really proud of him because the point was, you have a problem. I need you to think around the problem. And here's a few solutions. I just don't want you to think the way I'm teaching you to think. I want you to think for yourself and be a problem solver. And so he pulled it out, and I was like, where did this come from, right? But I was happy for him. And to be clear, that's kind of what we should see with education, is we're not teaching people to think in one way, but we're saying, hey, here's a few different maybe solutions to this problem in your own way. What do you think is best?
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for checking us out again this week on Make America Civil Again. Don't forget to like, share, on Facebook especially, and subscribe. And don't forget to leave a comment at the bottom telling what you think. Maybe you agree or disagree with Mike, or maybe you want to get interviewed about something you find important for all of America to hear. You can always email me at civilizeamerica@gmail.com, and I would love to hear from you and see what you're passionate about. Till next week, we're out. Peace.